My name is Lisa Chapman, class of '81 MBA from Yale School of Management. I'm chair of 1stGenYale, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome you tonight to our event. And it's going to be really exciting, Demystify Graduate Fellowship Awards. I bet you a lot of people on this call and people will watch the recording don't realize how many opportunities there are for first gen, especially for first gen low income college students and grads. And our event tonight will hopefully answer your questions. I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Yale Office of Fellowship Programs and Dwight Hall. I'm excited to say that we have over 215 students and alumni who have signed up to join us tonight. 76% of you are current Yale College students, which is fantastic. 11% are recent grads, and 13% are other alumni and graduate professional students. We also have alumni and students from 12 different countries: Australia, Canada, China, Colombia, India, Norway, Philippines, South Africa, Sweden, Singapore, and Turkey. So I'm just really grateful for the outpouring of interest in this program. And I'd like to begin to thank Dwight Hall for being our co-sponsor and welcome Peter Komlish. Peter, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to be here today. First, a little bit about Dwight Hall. Dwight Hall was founded by students more than 130 years ago at Yale, and has always been a center that connects students with the wider world. We believe that institutionally and collectively, Dwight Hall is a place for transformation, a place where people can make things happen. But for students, what that means is finding opportunities to connect with and engage with the world beyond the walls of university. And by doing so, discover more about themselves and their place in the larger society. That happens through community engagement in more than 85 student-run organizations, and through more than 100 fellowship placements around nonprofits and other institutions in New Haven and around the world. And that's really what we're interested in sharing with you today, the way in which through fellowship opportunities at Dwight Hall, you can begin the journey of advancing your career, personal development, and ultimately come to understand what your unique role is in the world, what you can bring, and what the world is really looking for you as individuals to be able to contribute. That can happen through summer fellowships at Dwight Hall, urban fellowships. It can happen through all kinds of new opportunities that we're creating every year with mental health and schools, and all kinds of different career opportunities. Many of our fellowships also not only help you kind of find your path in life, they also contribute to your attractive and maybe you can say competitive in future fellowships. So I would encourage you to reach out to the students and the staff at Dwight Hall and learn about what kind of opportunities are available, and also how the way in which people engage with the world helps contribute to finding the true power.
Peter, I want to thank you, and I want to just highlight Peter has served as the executive director and general secretary of Dwight Hall since 2013. He has a distinguished career working for the Peace Corps and as a leader of social justice. He's also a Yale alum and has an 09 MA from the Yale Divinity School. He's a Cornell graduate and taught English and writing in Thailand, in Japan, and then in the Philippines. And later, when he came back to the United States, he was a community organizer in the Bronx and ran a nonprofit public-private partnership. So Peter is what a role model, Peter, and leader for the Yale College students in running Dwight Hall. So thank you for your service. I'd now like to introduce Rebecca Westphal. Rebecca, you want to wave first? So we know, there's Rebecca. And I want to thank Rebecca and the Office of Fellowship Programs for co-sponsoring this event tonight. Rebecca is the Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of the Office of Fellowship and Funding. She's also a freshman advisor and fellow in Berkeley College. How many of you guys are in Berkeley College? Yay. She joined CIPE as the Director of Fellowships after 11 years working in undergraduate admissions, focusing on Africa and Asia. She's originally from the UK and completed her BA in Music and English Literature from Bennington College and has a master's in musicology from McGill University. After working in undergraduate admissions, she joined the Director of Fellowships, and she's been actively focusing on promoting and encouraging Yale College students and recent graduates to consider a fellowship abroad through a number of programs. Some are featured today, but there are many more programs. I put the information in the chat. If you go to the chat, you can pull up the list of all the fellowships available from the website. Rebecca is also co-founder of Holly Access Network and a group of organizations that support high-achieving, low-income African students and their search for higher education. And we need to congratulate Rebecca for receiving the 2019 Linda Lauram Award for Yale College Safety Net. Congratulations, Rebecca. Rebecca, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And nice to see some familiar faces. And I'm really, really pleased that we're doing this event. So actually, Lisa just said one of the first things that I was going to say, which was that, you know, we're going to talk about a few fellowships today, but there are so many out there. And so we shouldn't just be thinking of one or two, but really there are a whole load that we can help you apply to. I will say also that the Office of Fellowships and Funding provides a huge amount of support for any student who goes through a fellowships process, whether that's a summer process or a national or international fellowship process. So use our services. We have advising appointments, we have info sessions, we have graduate assistants who look at personal statements and proposals. So we can help you a lot. One thing I really want to point out, because I know we have some alums on here and some seniors, that fellowships don't have to be applied to necessarily when you are a student at Yale. Many of them can be applied for after you leave Yale and after you graduate. Some have age limits, and you know, we can talk about that, but don't feel that you need to put pressure on yourself to get all your applications in that summer between junior and senior year, because there is the opportunity to apply after you graduate from Yale, and we can also help with that. We're still available to you even after you leave. I think also sometimes the senior year at Yale is a great way to consolidate sort of your academic and your personal goals, to strengthen relationships with recommenders, and to sort of think about really what is your purpose with all of this. Freshmen and sophomores on this call, get involved in the fellowships application process, whether that's the summer. There are also junior year fellowships that you can apply to, and come and see us. You can see all of those on the Student Grants database, and these can be building blocks to national fellowships. So use that process, get used to it. The process in and of itself is useful, whether it's an interview, whether it's writing a proposal. It can really help you sort of focus your own narrative for applying for these things. And my last bit of advice, and I'll probably repeat this many times, is start early, at least 4 to 6 months before a deadline, so that you can get all the pieces together and all the recommendations and everything. But I'll stop there, and we'll continue, Lisa. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. I'd like to just also highlight Mark Propina. Mark and Ben, would you like to say a few words, Mark, and your role at Dwight Hall?
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank everybody for being here. This is Benjamin. He just turned 2. He's also excited to be on the call. So my role is Director of Programming and Evaluation for Dwight Hall. I work a lot with students that are oftentimes getting involved during their sort of academic career. We do have summer fellowships that I think students may be interested in, but I think my main purpose on the call is going to really be to listen to what a lot of the questions that students have are. So I'm really, I'm keen to hear what everybody else's questions might be. And also just to let you know that Dwight Hall and myself in particular are always just available if students have any questions. We have a Calendly on our website.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I'd now like to introduce our incredible trailblazing alumni panelists, and Bessie, our current student. So you're in the mix. I'm going to start first with Lauram and Amathenia. I'm pronouncing it correctly. He also goes by Paul Lauram when I first met him in 2014. He graduated in the class of 15 with a BA in economics. He is a Swasman scholar, focusing on business and politics in rural China. He currently is the project manager for Southern Sudan National Communication Authority, working on universal service of internet and cell tower opportunities throughout the country. Lauram could not join us tonight because it's 3 a.m. in Sudan, but we have him on video. So when we come to the actual depth of the presentation, we're going to show Paul Lauram in his own words. So let me start here with Bessie Bauman, class of 21, BA, majoring in economics, a Truman Scholar. Bessie, can you just introduce yourself a little bit and a little bit about your background?
Of course. Hi, everyone. So great to see so many faces, a lot of familiar names as well. I'm Bessie. I'm a current senior in Ezra Stiles, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. As Lisa said, I am a recipient of the Truman Scholarship. On campus, I'm involved as a first-year counselor in Stiles. I am also an academic strategies mentor, and I really enjoy volunteering with the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. And in terms of the Truman Scholarship, I hope to use the $30,000 in funding at one point in the future to pursue law school. But I'm also very open to answer any questions that you all may have, especially as I'm here and very willing to help with anything you may need. But thank you. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you, Bessie. You're going to hear more from Bessie as well as Rebecca and Peter as we get into the depth of our program after our brief introductions. Ellie Dupler, class of 16, BA Global Affairs. Thanks for waving. Ellie, can you give us a little bit of your background and what you're doing today?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really, really glad to be here. I am a first-gen graduate of Yale from a small town in northern Michigan. I graduated in 2016 with a BA in global affairs. And then while I was at Yale, I focused mainly on global health and specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. And then after graduation, I pivoted a little bit and moved to Bosnia for a year where I did a Fulbright and taught English and did some community organizing there. Came back to the US and went to law school at Columbia, which I just graduated from in May of 2020. I focused on primarily the intersection of international human rights and national security while I was at Columbia, and am now clerking, which is kind of like being an assistant to a judge. So I'm in Southern California clerking for 2 years and then plan to go back into the international human rights legal field at some point.
Well, Bessie, thank you so much. Congratulations on your recent graduation from Columbia Law School. That's fantastic. Next, I'd like to turn to Fernando Rojas, class of 19, BA and also an MA in history from a 20 Master's in Philosophy of Latin American Studies. Fernando, where are you? Hi.
Here.
Can you skip?
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. Can you say a few words about your background and where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for sharing so far. My name is Fernando. I grew up in Southern California. My parents immigrated from Mexico 30 years ago. And so that's sort of the thrust behind my interest in history as an undergrad. And then later on, my interest in pursuing a graduate degree at Cambridge. The Gates Cambridge Scholarship is really, it's wonderful, it's generous, it's a really fantastic experience, and I'm very happy to speak to anyone about that. I'm currently a 1L at Yale Law, and that's a whole other experience, Zoom School of Law. But I'm very happy to be here and very grateful for the invitation.
Okay, welcome, thank you. And we look forward to hearing more about your insights into Yale Law School as well. Rayanne, where's Rayanne? There you go. Rayanne Seminary Palumbo, class of 19, BA Global Affairs. And Rayanne, can you share a little bit of your background and what you're doing now. And I'm honored to say Rayanne is one of our executive committee members on 1stGenYale and has made tremendous contributions and has just included us in August in the cultural connections, of which we're grateful. So Rayanne, a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name's Rayon. Yeah, I grew up in Arizona. Grew up in a first gen, like pretty poor family. Didn't expect to go to a place like Yale. And really kind of like stumbled through my first couple of years. And I think the impetus behind applying to the Rhodes and other fellowships like it was just that I realized I wanted to keep studying after my first few years felt pretty underwhelming and I felt pretty unprepared for studying. So yeah, while I'm here, I'm doing an MPhil in politics, comparative government, and I just applied to stay for a DPhil in public policy. I'm interested in poverty policy and inequality policy broadly and welfare and things like that. I feel so grateful for the support of the fellowships office throughout my time at Yale. I had so many like summer fellowships and wonderful experiences that really shaped who I am today. And even during the interview process, they paid for me to fly out to San Francisco and interview and like stay in a hotel, which was so nice. So yeah, I'm super excited to talk about everything and hear everyone's questions.
And I have to say, I'm giving Rayanne some credit. We started talking about putting together this program about 6 months ago, because we felt there was a great opportunity for Yale recent grads, and this program is focused on that for this event, to share with current students, a little closer in their age and experience, the whole process. And so Rayanne, remember we were talking about this a couple of months ago, and here we are. So we just thought it's important, and we hope to do this on a regular basis to help Yale and to help current students and to help graduate students. There's a whole world out there for you guys, and we want to keep going, just given the reception of this. So thank you for your introductions. I want to start with Lauram's video. You're going to hear about 6 minutes of Lauram, and I asked him a few questions, which I'm also going to ask the panelists. So Valerie, are we ready to roll?
Hello, fellow 1stGenYales. I'm really bummed out that I won't be able to join you guys for this event, which is, in my view, I think probably the first of its kind at Yale. And I think also 1stGen has really grown, so I'm really happy. I wish I could have joined you guys and continue to grow and provide more support to our fellow 1stGenYales. So I think in the interest of time, so Lisa and I agree that even though I won't be able to join you guys for the live event, I can record a short video and share it with you. So she sent me 5 questions, and this short video is just my brief answers to those questions. So the first question is just to introduce myself. My full names are Lauram Arcangelo Paul Amenadea. I was in Timothy Dwight College, and I graduated in 2015 with BA in Economics. And I'm now back home in South Sudan. So that's where I'm recording this video from. But also explain why 6 p.m. US East Coast time is 3 a.m. here in Juba, South Sudan. So it's really in the middle of the night. And so that's part of the reason why I won't be able to, I was not able to join you guys for the live event. The second question is, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now? Sure. So I was born in here, South Sudan, but then it was still part of the Sudan then. But unfortunately, there was a civil war in our country throughout 90s and early 80s and bit parts of early 2000s. But so we left here when I was about 5 years old, and we ended up in a refugee camp in northern Kenya. So that's where I grew up. Attended primary school in the camp, and then after the end of primary school, I moved to Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, where I attended a high school called Alliance High School. Did 3 years there, and then went to a school called African Leadership Academy. Actually, it was started by a fellow Yale, Chris Bradford. And then 2 years there, I came to the US for a gap year before joining Yale, starting out at Yale in 2011. So that's a little bit about my background and what am I doing now. I currently work for the government of South Sudan in one of our national communication authority as a project manager for government's efforts to improve rural connectivity, rural telecommunication connectivity across our country. The third question is, why did you apply for the Swasman Scholarship? Oh, interesting. I think for me, this was in a little way not entirely planned, and the reason is this. So when I left early in 2015, I really wanted to. I was really keen on joining startup, and so we moved back to Nairobi, and a fellow Yale and I co-founded an agribusiness. We ran it for about a year, and then we ran into a couple of issues, and the startup failed. So after the startup failed, one of the issues that we had to deal with was just winding up the company. But my co-founder unfortunately got into develop alcoholism, and so we had to deal with all those things. But as a result, I was really stressed out, confused, and didn't know what to do next. So I reached out to Dean Jeff Brenzel, who was my master in Timothy Dwight College, but also my advisor throughout my time at Yale. So I emailed him and said, Dean Jeff, I'm really confused and stressed out for the next step. What should I do? Having the startup having failed, effectively failed. And so he suggested that I should check out a couple of fellowships, and Swasman was one of them. That was really interesting, that he thought maybe it would be good for me. And one of the reasons why he thought this would be good for me was because at Yale I took 3 classes on China, and I really enjoyed them. And so, and then throughout 2015, there was a lot of news about China in Kenya and other African countries. But also on a macro level, there's a lot of growing interest and of Chinese interest across Africa. And so this has been on the news. So I thought it would be a great idea. But entirely, I didn't really plan to do a post-graduate fellowship or anything. But this was just sort of, for me, an escaped, maybe an escaped route for a little bit, given what happened with my the startup in Nairobi. So that's how. That's essentially why I applied to Swasman. But of course, then the other reason is when I was applying, I had to build a case to why I wanted to join the scholarship. So part of it is now just my interest in understanding more China, given its growing role in Africa. So in brief, that was the reason as to why I applied. What was the process like for me? That was the fourth question. I think it was very similar to applying to colleges. So there were 2 parts to it. One, you make you submit your applications online, and then they go through the applications, and then they invite what they call them finalists to an in-person interview in London. And so there are 3 regions. The scholarship has mapped out the different parts of into 3 regions. So there's the US region, Africa and Europe are lumped together, and then Asia, including China. And so for the African region, African and Europe region, we're all invited to an in-person interview in London. So that's and then so the live an in-person interview had 3 parts actually. So the first thing, in the morning, you were given a puzzle, and then we were put up in groups of 4. So as a group, you're given an hour to solve a puzzle and also build something. And then during lunch, we have a lunch where you paired up with, I think, 7 other people. So both candidates who are looking to the programs, but also people who are conducting the interviews on behalf of the programs. And then in the afternoon, you sit in front of a panel of 8 people. The 8th person is, I think, the note taker. And so then for about 30 to 45 minutes, they ask you questions about your resume, about your application, the answers that you provided the answers that you provided in the written essays, to maybe if there's one aspect that they wanted to understand. And then there was also the final part was a live, I guess, recent event questions about what's happening in the world, and they're asking your opinion on it. Particularly, it was generally about leadership, I think. And then, I think that was fairly that. So that was the process. And then after that, then everybody goes back to their country of origin, and then we'll email the results. So that was the process. What advice would, the fifth question is, what advice would you give current Yale students and recent grads who are considering this? I think given this audience of first generation Yaleys, I think one of the things is, I think for current Yale students, you really have to, one of the things you have to think about your journey is that, of course, you need to graduate, but also when you think about opportunities that come after your time at Yale, I think fellowship, this type of fellowship are some of the opportunities. But these things are not for everybody, actually. I think you really have to have a good reason as to why you apply, because it's extremely competitive. So throughout your Yale, for current fellow Yaleys, I think one of the things you can do is to consider some of these fellowship in advance, and then throughout your Yale, you can map out or sort of have a strategy about how you build a story that you can tell an interview panel, or either in writing or in person. Yeah, so I think that would be one of my advices, because I look back and I thought, oh, actually, in many ways I was very lucky that I really was lucky to get into this, because they were really detailed about how you spent your time in college and why everything you've ever done to that point in your career built up to this, and why this fellowship, or whichever one you would apply to, would help you either progress in your career or get something. And then the other ultimate question is also, what would you contribute to these programs or fellowships? So you really have to think about that. And then for recent grads, it's almost very similar, but I think now the key question is, you've had a little bit time out of Yale or out of college, and when you apply to these programs, they would really ask why are you leaving what you're doing now, and why this fellowship would be good for you. So that's really very important, and I think would be more tricky, especially for people who have graduated and have had a certain year or a couple of months out of or either they have been on doing certain jobs, and now you're applying to this fellowship. So they really want to know why this fellowship, and how this would help your career, and how you would contribute to the fellowship. I think that would be it from me. Thank you so much, and I wish you guys a great time. Hope you learn one thing or two. And for the current Yaleys, enjoy Yale. I really missed Yale. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'd now like to turn to the rest of the panelists. I'd like to start with Bessie. And maybe, Bessie, we could start a little bit more. You shared your background with us, but tell us more about where did you start when you thought about applying for fellowship awards, and why the Truman Award?
So in terms of, where I've come from in my Yale career and what kind of really drew me to the Truman, throughout my Yale career, actually, I'm so grateful that Dwight Hall is here. I fell in love with service, and particularly through the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Network and program. I realized that was the kind of work that I'd want to be doing the rest of my life, honestly, working directly with people, helping others in whatever way that I could with my capacity, and really thinking about what are the ways we can make structural change. So I am a low-income student, so working with the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program was a way for me not only to consider how taxes and other welfare programs play a role in my life, but also in the lives of people in the New Haven community, and of course, all across the world. So with that context, I really started thinking about, well, if I'm going to enter public service, usually public service doesn't pay very well. And usually, in order to make the kind of structural change I'd like to make, I think I need graduate education. And I think Lauram's point, or Paul's point, on really thinking about your why and what you're going to contribute as a result of the award is something that should really drive your decision to apply to something. So for me, the logic behind I wanted to pursue graduate school, particularly a law degree, so I could specialize in tax law, really drew me to the Truman. The Truman is a public service fellowship specifically. It provides $30,000 in graduate education funding. The Truman is a fantastic community of public service leaders. And that is another reason that I wanted to join, and that is a benefit of the scholarship. So I was really drawn to it at the end of the summer between my sophomore and junior year. I actually got started a little bit later than I think most Truman applicants start. As Rebecca noted, 4 to 6 months is a really great heuristic to make sure you're getting ready. I learned about the Truman a little bit late, but I worked with Lindsay Lawton in the fellowships office, who was so helpful. And through that, I was able to go through the Yale nomination process and eventually the national competition.
That's great, Bessie. That's wonderful. Ellie, would you like to share your experience for both Truman and Fulbright? And if you could start, imagine yourself, first year at Yale. Where did you guys hear about these awards? Bring that into the conversation as well.
Yeah. So I think in many ways, my story echoes Bessie's story. I grew up in a very small town of about 500 people in northern Michigan. I had a single mom. I didn't come from, a group of people that were particularly connected to career and long-term planning. And I put a lot of time into trying to figure out how I could make a career out of the things that I liked. At first, when I got to Yale, I thought I wanted to be a doctor because that was the only career that I knew of where you could make money and provide for a family and also help people. And then I got to Yale and I realized that I was not at all talented when it came to the sciences compared to most of my classmates. So I had to figure out a way to pivot. And I pivoted into global health work, and then I started kind of that space kind of opened up a world of opportunity fellowship wise. I met a lot of people through global health that were talking about their career trajectory and talking about things that were not what I had thought you had to do to make a career, such as doing a 1-year fellowship in this place, or doing a contract a consultancy somewhere here. And it really made me think that, career paths were a little bit more circuitous than maybe they seemed when I was 18 and coming into Yale. I similarly knew that I was going to need to go to grad school at some point and had no idea how to pay for that because while I had the generosity of Yale behind me to fund my entire undergrad, law schools and public health schools and public policy schools, all of the programs I was considering at the time are not so generous with financial aid for the most part. And so I started just kind of Googling graduate school scholarships, graduate school fellowships, and eventually came upon the Truman Scholarship. It was, as Bessie already explained, it's geared towards people who are doing and want to continue doing public service work in the future. Like I said, I had been doing some work in global health in Ghana and Uganda. I had also done some stuff domestically with refugees who are resettling in New Haven and helping them with access to healthcare. So I kind of saw myself as a good fit, I guess, as good of a fit as anyone thinks that they are for something that seems competitive that they've never heard of. So I applied, I think I applied during the fall semester of my junior year. I probably did not put together my application 4 to 6 months in advance, which would have been great because I applied while I was studying abroad in Nepal. and I did like my Yale interview, because there's like an intermediate interview before you actually interview. Like Yale has to select the people it's going to nominate for the Truman Scholarship. And I did mine at like 3 a.m. in Nepal because of the time difference, like with like a very bad like phone connection. And so it was like a wonder that I made it through that process. Yeah, I mean, eventually got selected. I used the Truman Scholarship to help partially fund my time in law school. Unfortunately, also, as Bessie said, $30,000 doesn't go super far when it comes to something like a law degree, which is very, very expensive. But there are many other ways to help fund that I would be happy to talk to anyone about, offline later. But then after graduation, I knew I didn't want to go straight into law school because I wasn't exactly sure, I wasn't exactly sure how like a lawyer could also do human rights work, because similarly, the only people I had ever heard of who were lawyers did things like personal injury or contracts and like business law and stuff. And so I wanted to take a little bit more time to explore how I would merge like a law degree with human rights stuff. So a fellowship was a great opportunity to do that. I started looking into, Yale has a number of amazing postgraduate fellowships to do work abroad. In particular, I mean, there's a lot for domestic as well, but I was particularly interested in going abroad. And the Fulbright seemed like a good-ish fit. And I just kind of threw in my application like at the last, I don't want to say at the last minute. I mean, I thought about it for sure. But not really knowing what to expect, I guess. And just needing to, get some sort of funding for, one more year of something, one more year of training, one more year of experience before I could go into law school. And was very fortunate to receive the Fulbright, and then spent my year in Bosnia. One of the students that I worked with is actually on this call at the moment, and she just messaged me, which is very sweet. She said, "Not sure if you remember me, but I definitely do remember her." So got to work with a lot of students, both on their college applications and also on like English and some community organizing, community development stuff. And so that was a really valuable year for my like personal growth and like leadership development, stuff like that. Then I went to law school.
Ellie, that's good. Wonderful story. I think you touched on a few things that'd be great if Rebecca could jump in and just talk about your process, the role of Yale. Ellie talked about Yale recommends students for certain awards. Others you don't need to recommend. Maybe Rebecca, a little bit on the Yale process from your end.
Oh, yeah. And Ellie, thank you for mentioning that, how you pulled your application together in actually a pretty short period of time, because I think that is actually how a lot of the time it works for students. 4 to 6 months is what we recommend, but that doesn't always happen. And most of that is really, you just want lead time to be able to give to your recommenders, right? You want to give them a lot of time to be able to write you these very, very detailed and awesome letters, which Yale faculty do. In terms of nomination, and you're absolutely right, Lisa, there is a nomination process for a number of fellowships: Rhodes, Marshall, Truman, Beinecke, Fulbright. Also, if you're a student, you should go through the Yale process. So that the nomination process is always a number of months before the actual deadline for the fellowship. So any sophomores who are listening and interested in Truman, you should be chatting with us this summer, because the deadline for Truman is always in November, fall of junior year. So
that's great. Thank you so much. And can I turn back to Peter? Peter, can you just share a little bit, hearing a little bit of the conversation from Dwight Hall's perspective, and how you help the students be engaged in various important programs affecting the communities, both internationally and domestically?
Sure. I can give a sort of a framework, but then I'd like to turn it over to Mark and perhaps Johnny, who can have more of the hands-on experience with guiding students through the process. A big element of the work that we do in fellowships is involves critical reflection. It's not just about doing the work, trying to make a difference in your immediate kind of contact point, but it's all the work that goes into understanding yourself, your identity, your frameworks for viewing and understanding the world, and how the experience of the fellowship is deepening and broadening that understanding, which I think is really something that all of us as thinkers need to be doing, as civically engaged people, we should be doing as a daily practice. But fellowships provide a really unique opportunity for doing that. So a lot of what we encourage is sort of preparation before you engage in things. And Rebecca's office does really great work supporting this and thinking about why you want to do this and what you want to get out of it, and how your unique experiences have brought you to this place and where you want this to take you, so that it's not only about what the fellowship is going to do for you, but what you're going to do because of having the fellowship. And it's also about understanding that it's not all about you, that the fellowship is really, listening to Paul, it was amazing to understand his journey from South Sudan to where he is now. It's really about kind of a unique gift that you have to do something really special with other people. And all the people that are going to be involved, all the people who brought you to this point in your life, and all the people that you're going to continue to collaborate with and rely on to make a collective difference is really crucial. It's not, sometimes at Yale we get a little bit too wrapped up in the individual journey of the hero who's like, so amazing and did all this great stuff, and everyone will tell you that it's really about everybody's collaboration on making this possible. So let me just ask Mark or Johnny if they want to share more of the details about how the sorts of things they talk about with students. What do you think, Johnny? Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but I often think that the best part of my job is being able to say yes to passionate students. So if students come in with an idea of a project or a relationship and they need support in some way, whether it's a fellowship or starting a member group or whatever it might look like, it's amazing to be able to say yes to students, to have some of those types of opportunities. I think fundamentally, when it comes to service, community engagement, I want students to be mindful of and think about relationships and how you as an individual grow, develop, change, and what that means for your long-term sort of academic career and where you want to go moving forward. I think Bessie talking about VITA and how that sort of sparked, some thinking and how that has played into future decision making is an incredible story, but also not always uncommon. So students becoming active, engaged, forming relationships around that is really something that we want to see happen, and that we know that students know how to do. So supporting students to create that kind of environment is awesome. I'll also say that I'm always impressed and amazed at how far students take some of those experiences. So where students go with, things like the Truman are just incredible to watch. So so be open to new experiences, to becoming involved, becoming engaged, and building relationships, especially with people that aren't like you, and use that as foundation for things. And always, CIPE, the fellowships office, does incredible work. So while I know that the advice of 4 to 6 months seems difficult, you should really plan on it. Like you should really take the time to think about it, give yourself the space, and take the advice of folks that's why they're there. Take advantage of those offices.
Mark, thanks very much, and Peter for your insights about Dwight Hall and how to help students. I'd like to turn it now to Fernando. to share your experience and kind of the Gates process, the Gates Fellowship, how you found out about it, how you heard about it, and what the process was like for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you everyone who's shared so far. It's really wonderful to be in your company. I guess I started, so I learned a lot about the gates and the roads, and other things that I applied to my senior year by way of the fellowships office, which I'm really grateful for. Um, I applied as a sophomore to Mellon Mays, which is a really wonderful program for underrepresented students in academia broadly. And through there, found out about the Beinecke, which is helping me pay for law school, which I'm very grateful for. And it was, so I think in terms of how I learned about these scholarships and these opportunities, it was a mixture of professors and just upper class, like upper level students who were either applying or who were getting these fellowships, and then were sharing their experience with me as a first year student, as a sophomore, and then as a junior. Gates, and well, I guess, yeah, I can talk about applying to Gates my senior year. I took the summer before my senior year to sort of plan out who I was going to ask for letters of recommendation. I sent an email, I think like June, and it wasn't really like, oh, I'm applying. It was like, I'm thinking of maybe applying perhaps in a couple months. And my recommenders then got back to me and were like, oh, well, just let me know when you do make a decision, and we can get the ball rolling. So I think as someone who struggles to send any emails whatsoever, and particularly emails asking for letters of recommendation, maybe you can make them less scary by just saying like, oh, I'm thinking of applying to this, like, I would love your thoughts. And recommenders are usually very helpful and very generous with their time. And so it started off in the summer, and then the Gates application is due October, November, somewhere around there. It's early in the semester, in the fall semester, and you hear back before winter break or during winter break, and then the interview process is a weekend in February, early February or January. I don't know. Rebecca might have to correct me, but it was a really lovely experience. The interview was a lot more academic than other scholarships that I was interviewing for. It was like Gates splits up their panels into different like fields, so it's like social sciences and hard, or they don't call them hard sciences, like physical sciences and humanities. And so my panel was made up of people who were professors of literature at Cambridge. Who else? A professor of Spanish. And so their questions were very like academic. They were asking me about the field and what sort of holes I had identified in the literature and what I was going to write about, and what kind of support I was hoping to get from Cambridge. And so I enjoyed that interview process. I think it was a little bit more of what I had expected the interview to be about, since I was writing so much about the things that I was interested in studying and the questions that had motivated me to apply to Cambridge. It was nice that they were also engaging with those questions and were really taking those ideas seriously. And then I feel like the turnaround time was pretty quick for Gates. Maybe like a month or so, they informed me, and then you have to you have to apply separately to the university, and the college system at like Oxbridge is very interesting. That's generally like my journey through applying.
That's great. No, we have more to cover. So thank you. Oh, we'll be back.
Great.
Rayanne, Can you share your story and maybe a little bit about the process before you applied for Rhodes, how you found out about it, other things you had done that we talked about your background, but kind of the whole experience you went through to apply and what it feels like now to be at Oxford.
Absolutely. I wrote a bunch of notes. I'm going to try to organize my thoughts a little. I want you guys to have some like practical steps to walk away with. First, I'll start with what I think is a very common story and something that Ellie already said in her comments. But yeah, when I arrived at Yale, I thought I wanted to be an engineer because that's how I thought you could like make some money and support your family. I quickly realized I didn't really like the sciences that much and was much more interested in a lot of the issues that I experienced growing up and sort of the structures around them, which sort of lended to policy work. And that's something I think I also sort of first started to experience through 1st Gen organizing on campus. It sort of introduced me to the field of policy work and organizing. But yeah, I entered Yale, like didn't really feel prepared to study there. Did the FSY program to sort of help with that. But I think because of that, had a pretty like an okay time my first 2 years taking classes. I didn't feel like anything really connected that well with me, perhaps because I wasn't able to really engage with the material. But my junior and senior year, I started taking some classes that really started to like get me thinking about the things I cared about. I took a class called Poverty and Politics in US Cities that introduced me to the field of poverty politics as a discipline or as a field of study. And yeah, that got me thinking about potentially wanting to continue studying at some point, just to sort of have that experience again and have it in a slightly deeper fashion. I knew if I wanted to study further, I would need money. I would need some sort of funding, just like I did in order to go to college. And then that's when I started hunting around. So I think I think the first thing that sort of put it on my mind was a dinner that I had with Lisa. And she was like, do you know about these fellowships? Like, you should apply to all of them. And I was like, oh, maybe I should. And then I think like there was a perfectly timed info session at the fellowships office that I attended right before I entered my like summer before senior year. Yeah, so I thought I actually did not want to go to graduate school after graduating. But I also knew that because I would need money to attend graduate school, that I would sort of have to like maximize the opportunities to get funding. But in that first year, because I didn't like think it was my top priority, I decided to only apply to one thing. So I applied to the Rhodes to study at Oxford. Yeah, I'm going to stop here just for a second because I think this is kind of an important message. I sometimes hear in like fellowship panels that like people say like, you have to be 100% certain that like this is the thing you want to do if you're going to apply and be successful. But I don't think that's a super realistic like rendering of what a senior year is like, you know, like you're sort of like stumbling through your senior year, just like trying to figure out things you might want to do and then just like trying to submit as many applications as early as possible to do them. So I think it's okay if you're not fully certain graduate school is what you want to do, or you're not fully certain that this program is what you want to do. But if the deadline's early and like you have time to submit it, then maybe consider doing so. And then that's sort of what I did. Yeah, I was entirely I was entirely convinced that I would not be not eligible, but not like good enough to win one of these awards. I thought my GPA was too low. I thought my relationships with professors weren't good enough. And I remember this conversation with Rebecca, and I think the thing that really helped me is she was just like, you know, it's a very big ballpark of people that they're possibly selecting from, and you're above the eligibility guidelines. That means you're in the ballpark. Like, don't worry about it too much after that. And also, I think like it's sort of funny for someone who like knew nothing about the fellowship process to assume I knew enough to think I wasn't good enough. So it's sort of like, if you don't know anything, just sort of like let that be your like armor and just like kind of use that to ride yourself into not thinking too much about whether you're good enough or eligible or whatever it might be. Well, eligibility is a different thing, but like good enough. Oh, something on timing really quick. Yeah, I think the 4 to 6 months is really helpful, especially for the recommendation letters. And something I tried to do in the recommendation letters is, and I got this piece of advice from a professor who said that they liked when this was done, is I tried to provide just some notes on things I thought they might want to talk about me, like the things, like certain assignments I turned in that I thought were good and they thought were, or certain interactions we had, or just certain things that I thought might be good for them to talk about, and perhaps that I thought that other people wouldn't be able to highlight as well. And I think the thing that took a lot of time to draft those emails and make those requests, but I think the thing that was nice about that is it helped me sort of know what was going to be in my application when people were reading it, know at least a little bit more of what people are going to be saying, so I can know what to say myself. And then on that point, I think this is sort of a mental framing thing, but the personal statement in a lot of these applications is the only thing that you really can control in the moment. Like your transcripts are already sort of decided, you can like edit the formatting on your CV, but it's still your CV. You can't really edit too much of what's in the recommendation letters. The only thing you could really control is the personal statement. So I think it's really important that it's super personal, and like that it makes people see the person behind the stack of papers and like set of numbers that the interviewer is reading. And with that, like what I ended up using my like 4 months for was to write like dozens and dozens of drafts and half drafts, and then just keep deleting them because I thought they weren't like exactly what I was trying to say. But in that process, I think it's a very like iterative process of reflecting on yourself and learning about yourself. And something I'd often do is like I'd literally like make playlists of music from my childhood, like if I was trying to think about that time in my life, and like just try to sort of resurface and like re-trigger those feelings, and just make sure that that is what's being articulated on the paper. Yeah, so like the personal statement should really be something that, like regardless of the outcome, is something you grow from and really come to learn something about yourself through. And similarly, this is, I think, a step further, mainly for interview processes, but I think oftentimes the interviews, like Fernando said, are fairly academic, and what they're trying to see is how you're positioning yourself within a broader field, and not only an academic field, but also a field of perhaps, if it's policy work, or if it's some sort of science research. And what they want to see, they almost want you to be able to cite like mid-sentence where you position yourself in the field and where you want to see the field go, and how you think you can help it move there. And of course, why the scholarship or why the program can help you do that. And ideally, why it's important for the world. And hopefully it's something that's important for the world. Yeah, so those are all sort of like practical advice things. And then one thing I just want to shout out just before I stop talking is a book by a first-gen graduate who's now a professor. Her name is Jess Calarco. She's a sociology professor and actually studies issues related to educational inequality. She wrote a book called A Field Guide to Graduate School, Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum. I actually found it on Twitter accidentally, and she was giving away like copies to first-gen low-income students, and that's how I was able to get one. But like currently being enrolled in graduate school, like even aside from the application process, I found it incredibly helpful. I just think, like, as many of us have experienced in college, like you don't really know what to do when you get there. And this book has just been like a literal, like nice manual to sort of figure that out. And for people who aren't in graduate school yet, it has sections on choosing programs and fields of study, applying, and then sort of finding supervisors and like navigating programs once you're in it. Yeah, hope that's helpful.
Can you put in the chat the title of the book and the author so everybody can see it? That's great. You guys have been fantastic. You all have talked about your backgrounds, how you heard about the fellowship awards, what you did to apply, the process you went through, and recommendations for students. So I'd like to turn it back to Rebecca for a minute or two before we get to the Q&A and other additional discussion. Rebecca, anything else that from what you heard from the students that you'd like to share to be helpful to our audience about the process, or other advice for students? In our group tonight, we have a large number of Yale College, but heavily freshman year and first year and second year as well. So yeah, I think different advice for different years, as well as for the sophomores and for the juniors and seniors.
Sure. I'll just start by saying I think what Rayan was mentioning about feeling sort of that you're not good enough for the processes, I hear that a lot from students. And I think, I see all sorts of students go through this process. And there's always something that they bring to this that initially they don't see themselves almost. And it's a process of sort of eking that out almost, so that they feel confident in how they can present themselves and their story and their narrative and their, you know, I mean, it sounds cliche to say this, but really what their passions are, right? Where they want to go, like what does this road look like for them and how do they want to talk about it? So thank you for bringing that up, Rayon. In terms of, I know there are a lot of first years and a lot of sophomores, I would just say start doing stuff in the summer. There are so many summer fellowships at Yale that can support study abroad, independent research, projects, language study. Just begin getting out there. And also, of course, you have access to the SEA, which will provide $4,000 to do something here in the US as well over the summer. So there are a lot of ways to get out there, start experiencing things and using these experiences as building blocks throughout your Yale career, where you have just different experiences, different ideas, you're meeting different people, and that will help you sort of progress towards maybe eventually putting in an application for some of these fellowships that folks have been talking about. I'll say again, we have advising all year round. We don't shut off during the summer or during the breaks or anything like that. So please get in touch with us. I put in the chat the link to the Student Grants database so you can search for fellowships there. But I don't want to take up too much time because I know there will be questions and I want the panelists also to just answer some of those. So I'll just stop there.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. What we'd like to do now, we have another 15 minutes, and we're going to wrap up. I'd like to have a few minutes from our participants for questions for any of the panelists, or Rebecca, or Peter, or Mark. And then I'd like to ask at the end of any alumni who would like to share their experience with various fellowship awards. So any questions from the participants, either in the chat, or Mark, or people who want to raise their hand, that's great too.
I did raise my hand, which is kind of a fun feature here.
You can raise your hand on the little thing, yeah.
But I also, following what Rebecca was saying, I did want to put a plug in for Dwight Hall Summer Fellows and Yana Dwight Hall Summer Fellows. I'm going to put the link into the chat, but it's a perfect way for students to have a funded summer experience. We do ask that you come with a project and a community partner in mind. The application deadline is a little ways out. You don't need 4 to 6 months, but you do need time to think about it. So I'm going to put the application in there, or a link to the guidance page. And if you have any questions, reach out. But an excellent way to be involved in a community engagement format now.
Thank you, Mark. We have a question from Brett, which is, sometimes getting started can be the most intimidating part of the process. Beyond the immediate reflection and considering the narrative, what's the first concrete steps that students should take to prepare to apply to one of these fellowships? Who of our panelists like to jump in and just answer that question? Ellie, go ahead.
I have a very short answer, which is just to say, set up an appointment with Rebecca if that's something that's available, or with someone who is a fellowship advisor. I think that, like, getting in with someone and not feeling like you're completely alone in the process is like the biggest thing that you can do for yourself. So that would be the first thing I'd recommend. And the second thing, if it's like actually time to apply, just make an account and start filling out the easy parts. Fill out your name, fill out your address, click on the multiple choice kinds of things, and start feeling like, oh, I'm like getting something done. Like I'm taking some concrete steps towards doing this. And that sounds very silly, I think, but sometimes it can help you get over that hurdle of like, start.
Great, excellent advice. Fernando, you were nodding.
Yes, that gets me into trouble because I nod a lot in class. I think the other concrete step, along with speaking to Rebecca or someone in the fellowships office, would be to speak to professors or job supervisors, really anyone who you identified as a mentor, because sometimes I feel like at Yale, when you say, or when you're applying to something, it can be a little intimidating to go out and be like, oh, I want to go for the Truman, or I want to go for the Rhodes. But you know, your professors are there to support you and to um, uplift your dreams. And so it's like really an empowering experience to say like, oh, I want to go for this, and have someone reflect back and say, okay, well, how do we make this happen for you? What can I do to support you along the way? So yeah, if it's not someone in the fellowships office, definitely a professor or a supervisor or someone like that.
That's great. Thank you. Ryan, you want to jump in fast?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that too. One thing that I found really helpful as soon as I was starting is creating a Word document where I started, like, you just have a big heading of the name of the fellowship you're considering. If you need it, maybe like a short description of what it's for. And then you want to start listing things under it, like what's required and when. If for example, the fellowship has 3 recommendations, you want to like create 3 like literal slots and start thinking of people you might want to fill in, like note when you've asked them, what you've asked them for. Just literally start like creating a big document so you feel like you have your head wrapped around it all. And then I think when you start approaching the actual writing of the application itself, something that I found really helpful, and this is actually kind of a follow-up to what I was talking about before in terms of like, I think many of these want to see you position yourself within a field and a field of work as well. Something that helps with that and that really helped me is, so I was sort of writing about inequality and like welfare politics and things like that. I didn't know a lot about the field. I knew it's what I wanted to study. I started by just asking a lot of my friends for like their favorite articles that were about that type of thing. And then through reading those articles, I started to sort of get introduced to like not only the relevant like contemporary events that are related, but also like relevant arguments and also sort of who the main names in the field are. So I could start to position some of my ideas and my thoughts around those people and start to develop critiques and sort of think about how those critiques also might relate to my personal background and relate to what I sort of have experienced in my life, whether that's like an internship or growing up. So that could be a nice way of just like starting to feel like you're understanding what you're trying to tackle. So you, like when you start reflecting, you kind of have a direction to reflect towards. And then like the other thing is like, start listening to old music from your childhood, as I said before, and like just start like feeling things and like reflecting and just knowing what you want. Go back and like read your favorite readings from previous classes, or just like, I don't know, just try to start getting ideas into a notepad or like whatever it might be. And keep a literal notepad with ideas, whether it's like on your iPhone or physically.
Great, Ryan, thank you. Next question. Obviously, asking faculty members for letters is a pretty substantial request of them. How do you approach a faculty member? And if you have several letters you'd like the faculty member to complete for you? Bessie, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I think Fernando mentioned, like this can be a pretty intimidating thing, but what I would say, a very simple step and something that you can do yourself is one, like check the timing and really give people time. People really appreciate, especially busy professors, when you reach out well in advance. And I think this is really important, especially if you know a professor is particularly busy, has a lot of research interests, et cetera. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is creating your own how to write a recommendation for yourself. So for me, what I've done is I've created a template that is literally like a guide for a professor writing a recommendation letter with every single thing they might need in order to do this recommendation. So for example, the first section is like logistics, highlighted in bold, and in red is like when the recommendation letter has to be submitted. And then laying out the description of the recommendation letter and what it should include. And then the list of your application materials. It is really, really helpful. In one example for the Truman and for other scholarships, if you can include samples of your essay in the materials to your recommender. That way they know what you're going to be talking about so they can supplement what your application, can ultimately be. And I think this is a really important thing. And I think also Ryan mentioned like adding notes at the end of like what they could potentially even talk about. And one professor of mine went so far as to say, I want to know what other recommenders are going to be talking about and what you expect from them too. So giving them the full context of your application and the other recommenders in an easy, maybe 2-page document is a great way to do this once you've asked and kind of gotten there, whether they're willing to do it. But I think making it easy in that way not only allows the professor to write the recommendation letter, but then it's really easy then for you to come back, maybe if you're wanting to apply for another fellowship, to say, hey, could you tweak this letter that you did for me before in this particular way and then resubmit it for me? And usually professors are pretty willing to do that. And I found that to be a really helpful strategy in making things as easy as possible, giving people time, and then being very clear and concise on what I need them to do.
That's great. Bessie, I was going to say we have 10 more minutes to go. And I was going to say for the panelists, if you'd like to share your emails for the participants to contact you with their questions once we sign off, feel free. And for participants, if you have other questions, you can email 1stGenYale@gmail.com, and we can then direct your question to the appropriate person or to Rebecca Westphal, Director of the Office of Fellowship Programs. So Ellie, you want to comment on the recommendations since you've had to do two for Truman and Fulbright?
Sure. The only thing, I think Bessie's advice was perfect. That's exactly what I would do, is just send them a packet of information, tell them exactly, you know, what you hope to have, how their recommendation fits into everything else. The only thing that I would add is that now having been a teacher and also being a teaching assistant throughout law school, I've been on the receiving side of a lot of recommendation letter requests over the last like 4 years. And it's really quite an honor to be asked to write a recommendation letter for someone. And it, yeah, I mean, it does take time, and it is one more thing on your to-do list, but it's like, don't be afraid to do it, because like professors know that that's part of their job. Teachers, teaching assistants, whatever, know that that's part of their job and look forward to helping you get to where you want to go. And it's like a really exciting part of teaching, in my opinion. And I think a lot of professors actually feel that way. So don't let the like asking for recommendations part hold you back. And also, once you've written one for someone, it's a very, very minimal change that you have to make to submit another one. So asking, you know, for, oh, will you do one more for me, is really, takes like half an hour, and it's not a big deal usually.
Ellie, thank you. Comment from Gabby Garcia, who is a sophomore. Given that the pandemic has changed how we interact and build relationships with professors and employers, I was wondering what advice you have for navigating the fellowship process in this new environment.
Maybe I'll just say a quick word. Yeah, I can understand how that's a very, very different sort of environment. What I would encourage you to do is actually, you know, part of asking for recommendations is having conversations with people as well, not just sending them an email. And so if you can get in touch with them and maybe just arrange, you know, a Zoom call, like go to office hours on Zoom, use all of those things as much as you can. And that's how people were doing it last semester when they were collecting recommendations. So I don't know if anybody else has any other advice on how to make those connections.
Okay. Okay, what I'd like to do now, we're running to the end of our program, and I'd like to call on a couple of alums who are in the room who have other fellowships. And Tomas, where's Tomas?
Right here.
There you are, Tomas Norberg, who's calling in from Sweden. So Tomas, what time is it there in Sweden?
It's around 1:25.
Oh, good. Okay. Can you share just a minute or so about your experience?
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you. So I was a Fox Fellow at the University of Cambridge, and I combined this with an internship at the United Nations headquarters in New York. I was on the 37th floor at the Department of Political Affairs, and I focused my master's studies on the United Nations. And I also received an award to spend a month in The Hague to study together with around 80 other students from around 40 countries. And my time at Cambridge was really wonderful, and I had two supervisors. One was a professor, and the other one was a former top advisor to participants in the peace process in Bosnia. Yeah, I can wholeheartedly recommend this fellowship.
Great. Thank you, Tomas. Dave Rubin, you'd put something in the chat about a fellowship. Do you want to make a comment about your experience?
Yes. I attended the graduate school of the arts and sciences from 1981 to 1985. And I was fortunate in that Yale gave me a full fellowship. I got accepted by 5 graduate schools. Yale was the only one to offer me a fellowship. Luckily, Yale was my first choice. But I have actually asked myself, well, what would I have done if Yale had not offered me a fellowship? Because I didn't know anything about what we're talking about now, all these different fellowship opportunities. But even for people in graduate school, I mean, I had 4 years to write my dissertation, and I never did. But I guess if I wanted to continue, I would have looked up fellowships so I can continue to do so. So it's important both not just for undergraduates, but for graduate students also who may need more time to continue to complete their dissertation. But as I wrote, and my question is, are there some fields of study where you're more likely to get a fellowship from the school itself? I think Yale Graduate School, every PhD student gets a fellowship. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody out there, but which I think is a great bargain in education, of course. So I'm just wondering if anybody can kind of follow up on that.
Great. I don't know, Rebecca, can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Dave, I think the fellowships you're talking about for graduate school are for, as part of the admissions process when students become PhD students at Yale. In terms of specific fellowships for different fields, yes, some exist. I mean, Swasman, for example, is specifically for a master's degree in global affairs.
Right.
Rhodes and Marshall and Fulbright and Gates Cambridge can be any field, any degree, pretty much. Truman also is a general fellowship, so that can be used towards any graduate degree. There are specific fellowships in the sciences through the NIH. And there are a whole bunch in the sciences which you can apply for. So yes, there are some, the Hayes Brandeis, which we do in the arts as well. So yeah, the students can search actually in the Student Grants database for fellowships specifically by subject. And I put that link earlier in the chat.
That's great. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our program, so we have one last question, and I'd like the panelists, Rebecca and Peter and Mark, for your closing remarks as well. I'd like to tie it into a question in the chat from Nina. If you could give your younger applicant self one piece of advice, what would it be? So for those panelists who are applicants looking back, and for Rebecca, Peter, and Mark, your closing comments. So let's start with Bessie.
I think I want to echo what a couple of people have said, but really bring your true self to the table. And ultimately what it comes down to is sometimes luck and sometimes how people connect on a certain day. And it's not an issue to try again or try in a different direction. Usually these nudges can really help you kind of figure out where you're meant to be, wherever that might be, even if that comes with a no sometimes. So bring your full self and don't be afraid to try again.
Thank you. That's great. Ellie.
Yeah, I'm glad that this question came up because there's one point that I wanted to make that I didn't squeeze in anywhere else. My advice would be don't count yourself out based on your grades. When I was applying to the Truman Scholarship, Yale had a 3.8 GPA cutoff allegedly for its endorsements, like who it was going to put forward for the Truman. And I had about a 3.6 GPA and I applied anyway. And I ended up not only getting the Yale endorsement, but getting the scholarship. And had I counted myself out during that process, I wouldn't have, never would have happened. And I actually later didn't apply for the Rhodes Scholarship endorsement through Yale for the same reason. I don't know why I didn't learn the lesson from myself the first time. But that's like one of my great regrets about my academic career was not applying for like the graduate programs in the UK because of my GPA. And so I would just encourage you like to, take those things as suggestions, but sometimes some of them are fluid. I mean, there are some programs, like I think the Marshall Scholarship, you actually have to have a certain GPA to get it. But others are a little bit more flexible. And so don't count yourself out.
Thank you. Fernando.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. I think to not repeat what Ellie said, something else that I have been thinking about and reflecting a lot since I left Yale College was how important my on-campus jobs were. I think there's a lot of discussions about what it means to work and be a student at the same time. But I really think that I learned so much from my positions at the law school, at Ezra Stiles as a college aide, in a lot of different positions. And so really see your jobs as another learning experience that brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of, I don't know, it builds a lot of character in students, I think, and really appreciate the relationships that you can have with your supervisors. I still have those relationships, thankfully. And I think those were really important while I was applying to some fellowships and some other opportunities that I've been seeking as well. So that's a little different, but don't count yourself out.
That's good. That's wonderful. Thank you. Rayanne, looking back at your earlier applicant self.
Yeah. I would probably say, I guess echoing the name of the event, Demystifying Fellowship Awards or whatever it is, try not to get too caught up in the mystique of it all. I guess like something probably all of us experienced when we got to Yale is like you get there and you're sort of like, you've always seen it as this like, just this like abstract thing, this like institution, this like incredibly prestigious place, this like whatever it might be. And then you get there and you realize like the people who run the social media account are just like some random like person, or like, you know, just like everyone's just people. And it's like, you sort of like part of it's sort of sad in some ways to lose some of that mystique and like feel like you don't have something to like look up to and like worship in a way, but like that's also, I think, very healthy. And it's something that you should feel very empowered to do with these scholarships. Like so for the Rhodes, they let you know the day of the interview who wins, like right after this, which is of course like one of the most stressful times ever. You're hyping it up to the max extent that you ever could. You've just won it. Like it's even more hype for you. Like you go, like we went to the back room and they gave us like an Office Max, like blue folder with like a tag on it. It was just like, like Rhodes materials, and it was like Comic Sans font on the inside. And like literally like one of the interviewers came up to me right after and was like, oh, like I know like most people don't actually end up applying to the program or like doing the program that they propose. So like if you don't, like let us know, it's totally fine. Like I'd be happy to talk to you about anything else. It's like, I guess it's just, of course, like you want to take it really seriously when you're in the interview and like pretend that it's super serious, but at the end of the day, it's not that serious. And I think that kind of like might help you as well in the long run.
Thank you, Rayanne. I want to introduce Laura Plata. Laura, where are you? Laura is a 2019, right? Graduate, is that right? Good. Can you just share a couple of minutes? Because I think you have a great story to tell. Just 1 or 2 minutes would be great.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Laura. Nice to meet you guys digitally and to be in the same space digitally. Also a first-gen low-income student at Yale. I think I'm mostly focused on migration and low advocacy for FGLI students. And I received the Rhodes Scholarship in 2019, and I'm currently here doing a master's in refugee and forced migration studies. And I guess just in terms of advice for you guys, I know we probably have like a range of years here. I would just say to follow, like the advice I would give to myself as like looking back on things now is just that I think it would be a disservice to like all the things that you guys have a potential to accomplish and experience during your time at Yale to necessarily just focus on these fellowships. Like they're wonderful, incredible opportunities. But I think you get to a point where you can apply for these opportunities because you've been actually following the things that you're passionate about and love and are excited to do. And that can look like everything from having like a great on-campus job in the stacks to perhaps doing something abroad research-wise. It's like everything and anything. And I think the one thing that I wish I'd internalized more as a student was just that there's no one way, there's no one type of person who ends up winning these scholarships. It looks like so many different types of people, and it could be you. But I think that the way to maybe go about thinking about these applications is that you don't need to transform into something that you're already not. Just being the person that you are now is, I think, the most valuable thing that you can bring to any of these applications.
Laura, thank you. Now turning it over to Rebecca for closing comments.
Sure. I would just say, you know, as you're going through this process, be realistic. and also just understand what you can learn from going through this process in and of itself, because it's really, really valuable. And thank you so much. I'm really happy that this is happening, and my calendar, I'm sure it's going to fill up, which is totally fine. That's fine. Make appointments.
Okay, that's fantastic. Mark, would you like to have a closing comment?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing that I would say is take care of your mental health and be sure to forgive yourself, and take time for reflection. I also just wanted to make sure that my colleague Johnny Scafidi had something that he wanted to say too. So I wanted to make sure that he had the floor for just a second.
That's gracious. Thanks, Mark. Really quickly, I wanted to thank everybody for being here, but also as part of the Dwight Hall staff team and also having a first-gen experience myself, something that applies to all of you, regardless of fellowships. I have no fellowships to speak of, but general advice for you and insights on past Yale experiences, to recognize that there's a lot more people rooting for each of you than you realize. And we at Dwight Hall, Rebecca at fellowships, Lisa in the alumni community, all the alumni on this panel tonight, including the ones who didn't have a chance to speak, we're in your corner. And you should know that, you should feel that. You'll know that as you attend more first-gen events, which I highly encourage you to do. Thank you to Lisa. But also use the opportunity, especially in this context of COVID. I really applaud Gabby's question. In this context of the COVID environment, use office hours, use Zoom conversations, not just to talk about your classes, not just to ask a question about your current class, because you may not have one, but use it as a chance to ask your professors about their field, about their research, things that appeal to you. Use that to build the relationships and to use a springboard. And also hear their story, because the more you talk to others, the more you'll hear elements of their story that go well beyond the bio. And you'll hear about how their on-campus job has somebody shelving books at the library was deeply meaningful to them. That will help you reflect on your own narrative, which is extremely powerful.
That's great. Thank you, Johnny. Peter, last comments?
No, I think that so much wisdom has been shared that I don't have anything to add, but simply to welcome everyone to reach out to us. As Johnny was saying, we're in your corner, and we're happy to field any calls or emails, and someday we'll be in person again. And please show up on Old Campus, walk in, our doors are always open.
That's great, thank you. And on behalf of 1stGenYale, the Office of Fellowship Programs in Dwight Hall, I want to thank everyone for your participation tonight. I especially want to thank all the panelists, Lauram in the Sudan, Bessie, Ellie, Fernando, and Rayanne, and Rebecca as well, Peter, Mark, and Johnny. You guys have been fantastic. And I apologize for being a little 10 minutes over our time, but this has been a robust presentation and discussion, and with so many participants still on, I didn't want to really cut anybody off. I also want to thank Valerie, who's been an incredible, let's do that little reaction hand sign thing, who's done a fantastic job running the Zoom technology, and Nick Randos, and I want to thank him, who's joined us as our first-gen intern and also helped with tonight's work. So I want to thank you all for joining us. We do have a recording on this. Give me a couple of days to get it together. And we don't automatically send it out. So if you want it, email us. It will be on our 1stGenYale YouTube channel. But if you want it faster than that, just email 1stGenYale and we'll be glad to send it to you. Thank you all for being on this panel. You made a choice to be here, and we're really grateful for it. And I know Rebecca and I are going to continue to work together with Peter and his associates at Dwight Hall to see what other things we can do to help you guys learn about these opportunities. We 1stGenYale alumni in this presentation, as well as throughout, are here to help you any way we can. And we want to make the world a better place, and you guys are the next generation. So I want to thank you all for being here. And thank you, Johnny, for the PR on us. Come join us on our events now on Zoom. You see them. So we look forward to seeing you in the future. And I want to wish everybody a good night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.